for Muslims. And we began to find other cases all over the country. And eventually we wrote up a report about it, inventing terrorists, about how the government is going around literally inventing terrorists. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. Eventually, other groups like ours around the country came together and formed something called Coalition for Civil Freedoms, CCF. And I'm proud to say that the Muslim Legal Fund of America was one of the founding members of our coalition. So we've had good relations over the years and value the work that they do. With that background, I would just say that Yassine and I, the person that we represented, after he was convicted, he got 15 years in jail, and for absolutely nothing, he was completely innocent. And I think almost everybody that has looked at the evidence has agreed with that. And by the way, there is a major movie out about it called Witness. And if you doubt what I say, go see the movie Witness. You can get it on smart television, Witness. And I think you will agree also. They go through the evidence, and this was complete framework. Like, unfortunately, many of the other cases that we've been involved in. But anyway, this is what I wanted to say to you. I'm going to start my talk really right now. The Muslim community is being scapegoated for things they are not guilty of. This came about, I think, because the Bush administration was caught short when in 9/11. They missed all of the signs that there was going to be an attack. They looked foolish. They didn't protect the country. And they pivoted to blame the Muslim community, the local American Muslim community, of what happened. And they began to depict it as a disloyal Americans following a hateful terrorist religion and formed into a vast secret network to support terrorist attacks. And if that sounds strong, if that sounds a little bit excessive, and I'm quoting it right here because these are literal words that the FBI has used in our cases to describe what they are doing. They actually saw Islam in those terms as a disloyal, hateful, terrorist religion, secret networks, a vast network of people to support terrorist attacks. So that's what you're faced with. You're faced with a government that sent hundreds, thousands of agents out with that attitude. We are going to weed this out in the country. We're going to figure out how to do it. Well, having said that, of course, the FBI had to produce all of these people, all this vast network of terrorists. And the evidence is clear. There was no such network. There was not a large pool of disloyal Americans that were ready to stab America in the back. This was a complete lie, a fabrication, and they knew it right from the start. But they went ahead anyway because they got great benefits out of it. So what they did, they started with a process called preemptive prosecution, what we call preemptive prosecution. Prosecuting somebody before they commit a crime, based on the government's own flawed, biased view of what their ideology is. In other words, if you believe that somebody has an ideology which might, in the future, lead them to commit a crime, you prosecute them now, convict them of something else, any pretext charge you can get, and lock them up. And so, over time, our organization, CCF, is now working with about 250 prisoners and their families that have been locked up, some for very long periods of time, some for life, for completely nonsensical charges that should not have been charges at all. This is a lot of suffering on a lot of families. And it's hard, I think, to understand the magnitude of what these families are going through. Partly because the Muslim community itself is uncomfortable with having them in the mosques, having them part of the family, and they tend to push them away. So one of the things that our organization is trying to do is to encourage Muslim families to reach out to these families and of people that are ended up in jail, and to include them in the movement. So what did the government get out of this? Well, it got out the ability to say that we're under attack by a vast terrorist army somewhere out there. And using that, they could justify bombing in Muslim countries, invading Muslim countries, Iraq, Afghanistan. They could impose unjust laws and impose those unjust laws disproportionately on Muslim populations. And they could demonize Muslim communities as disloyal. I wanted to just quickly refer to this report that we put out called Inventing Terrorists, the Lawfare of Preemptive Prosecution. What we did was we took 603 cases, 608 cases, in which the government claimed that they had convicted real terrorists. We're doing our job, we're out there, we've got 608 real terrorists, and we listed the names. And we went through and analyzed that and found that 93% of those cases were actually preemptive prosecution cases in which the government had fabricated the charges and had fabricated the basis for it. And that these were phony cases. They should not have been listed at all. People should not be in jail. We also, later on, CCF, and I have to say in all of this that we were partnering with ICNA Social Justice, who has also been a member of our coalition and a great friend to us also. The CCF and this ICNA Social Justice and 6 other major organizations around the world decided to put out in 2021 a report about the impact of the war on terror on the Muslim community. And I love this report. I think this is great. If I could do it, I would say just read this report, and it will tell you everything that I know about what has happened to the Muslim community and how they've been scapegoated and how they've been demonized. It is my hope at some point that we could get many mosques to have a copy of this report and use it as a study guide to talk about it, because I think there's a lot of misinformation in the Muslim community about these cases and about how they should respond to it. And I think this would help. And I go back, let's see, to, I go back to Marie Michelle Alexander when she wrote her famous work, The New Jim Crow, a number of years ago, for the black community about mass incarceration. And that book had a huge impact, and a lot of organizations took it up and studied it and began to realize the impact of what was in that book and what it meant. That once the truth came out, how essentially Jim Crow was being perpetrated through the prison system, it changed the dialogue, and people began to bring change in their own life. And I think that kind of study within the Muslim community could do the same thing. They could realize what really happened and could change what they're going to do, the way they approach the government and the way they join together as a community rather than being split up by the government. So anyway, the question really is, how should the Muslim community respond to this kind of attack by the U.S. government on them? And I have to say, one alternative is to simply say, look, if you think that we're terrorists, if you think that we are disloyal, we're going to prove you wrong by being as loyal as possible, and as being the least disruptive possible, and being completely passive, and whatever you say, we will do it. That's one alternative. I would suggest the last 20 years, that's kind of the strategy that's been followed. Let's not make waves, let's not give them anything to suggest that we're disloyal or that we are terrorists. But I would also suggest that there's a second way to approach it. Another alternative of pushing back as a community and saying, we're not terrorists. Stop profiling, stop being scapegoating us. Stop surveying us. We are not the kind of community that you have claimed. This narrative that you've created is false. I go back and I think a little bit about, for example, what Black Lives Matter did. They had a horrible situation with police violence against their community. And at some point, rather than simply trying to avoid it, they began to stand up and say, you're not going to get away with this. Every time you go act unprofessionally as a police officer, we're going to be there. We're going to film it. We're going to get it out on the television. And we're going to start to demand respect. Respect as a community. Now that would be, and you've seen what happened, how it changed the dialogue, how it changed the way people view the whole situation. In the Muslim community, we had a similar situation. Not well known, but it was the secret evidence bill. How many people here have ever heard of the secret evidence bill? All right, well that, I guess, shows the problem. Back in 1997, there was a man by the name of John. One day the U.S. came in and they arrested him, and they locked him up in jail. And then they said, we're going to deport you to Palestine. And he said, why? And they said, we can't tell you, it's classified. And he said, well, I'm entitled to due process. I'm entitled to go into court and find out why you're deporting me, and why I'm in jail. And they said, well, you can have a hearing. We'll give you a due process hearing, but we can't show you the evidence because it's classified. So that's secret evidence. You go out of the country without any clues to why. And a group down in Florida, led principally, I think, by Samuel Larian, my mentor in all of this, who was the founder of CCF, said, this is wrong. This is not American. We should fight this. And he went out and he gathered in as many Muslim leaders as he could. And he said, we are not going to stand for this. We will not take this disrespect from the U.S. government. And slowly, over 3 years, they built a coalition. They went out, they reached out to members of Congress. They kept constantly down in Washington just saying, this is not American. You can't stand it. You can't, run a country with this kind of biased laws. And at the end of 3 years, they had won over bipartisan support for a bill that would abolish secret evidence. This was a major victory for the Muslim community, one of the greatest victories that they'd ever achieved as a community. And the White House called for a meeting on to announce this bipartisan resolution, which would then be put into law. And all the Muslim leaders got ready to go down to this tranquil meeting. Thank you. And you know what the date was? 9/11, 2001. On the date that they were supposed to be in Washington to announce this triumph, the attack of 9/11 hit. The announcement was never made, the coalition fell apart. This huge victory that they'd achieved was known, and nobody here knows about it. And yet we could do that. We don't have to be pushed around. We don't have to say, all right, the government beat us, there's nothing more we can do. I would love to see that same coalition reestablished and go back there again and go down to Congress and say, we don't have to take this profiling. We don't have to take your abuse. We are American citizens and we want Islam treated with respect, just like any other religion. So that's what I'm hoping would come out of this. That with the Interim draft as a way to study the whole problem, Muslim communities all around the country can come together with the leadership of some of the big groups out there and form a new effort. And I'd like to have it focused on, for example, getting pardons. Legal efforts to free the prisoners has been relatively unsuccessful. It's been a real tough slug. But I honestly believe that if we could start getting some pardons, it would break this picture of Islam as a terrorist religion. It would be a kind of an acknowledgement, okay, we screwed up, we're sorry. And I think more would follow, and I think laws would change, and all of a sudden it would be a way to start moving the law in the right direction. So I will leave leave it there to simply say, don't forget the political prisoners. Right now, we're working with 250 of them. Don't forget them. They are people that are valuable and that we need as a community to reach out and embrace.